Hello and welcome to another Times Radio Members Question and Answer. Now today I'm answering your comments. That's from our channel members on Frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram. You know that I present Times Radio Frontline, but I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and I commentate on all matters defence, geopolitics, security, cyber, terrorism, and anything else that people will cross my palm with silver to do. Genetically, I've got an opinion on everything. Now, I have to start today with a thank you. A thank you to Emmanuel. Emmanuel has corrected me in one of my interviews where I referred to the French president as Francois Macron and not Emmanuel Macron. So, Emmanuel, thank you very much indeed for highlighting that. Please, the rest of you, if you find any mistakes, let me know, because my slightly dyslexic brain does confuse things at times. And of course, Emmanuel, I know you're now in London for Christmas, and you're not the French president yourself, but thank you for picking that up. Starting off with Randy. Now, Randy, you say Trump ignoring the Ukraine-Russia war would be a good thing, right? Everything he touches totally goes to heck. I don't think Trump is quite ignoring the Ukraine-Russia war. I think he's getting very frustrated, and it's quite clear he's coming down on the side of the Russians in a lot of the rhetoric that's coming out and anti-Ukraine. And with the new US national security strategy, he's come down against Europe and seems to be against NATO. What's driving all of this, I don't know. Vladimir Putin will be sitting behind his big oak desk in Moscow with a big white cat on his knee, stroking it and going, yes, there's little I have to do. But certainly, as Trump attacks Zelensky and attacks Europe, Putin is feeling more and more emboldened. So if Trump's doing anything, he's elongating the war. He's not ignoring it, and he's not shortening it. He needs to realize that. Next point comes from Lars. And Lars, isn't the most important thing about frozen funds is that they will no longer be available for the Trump family and the Kremlin mafia to drool over? This decision will be the single most important act for peace in Ukraine. And Lars, you're referring to the US proposed 28-point plan, which actually was the Russian 28-point plan, where the $300 billion of frozen Russian assets in Europe would be split, with most of it, or almost 50-50, going to the United States and Donald Trump, and the other being returned to Moscow. It's something that Donald Trump clearly would have liked. Europe is not going to allow that to happen. And yes, I think that is important. But actually, I think the most important thing about the frozen funds would be if they can be unfrozen and given to Ukraine, because that would send a very, very clear message and would upset an awful lot of Russian oligarchs who would see their billions disappearing. And that might cause a little bit of internal consternation, at the very least, inside Moscow, and could lead to the start of proper opposition to Putin. Let's hope that the rumours that we're hearing that $100 billion worth of that is going to be released in the coming days actually happens. One to watch. Next point comes from Marty, and Marty asks why many people still believe the Russian talking points, not just those in Hungary and Slovakia. Just check the fringe parties, be it on the left or the right of the political spectrum. They all call for business with Russia and disarming ourselves. How foolish. Marty, you've hit the nail on the head. People are looking at what is coming out in social media, and the pro-Russian bots, backed by some quite sophisticated pro-Russian campaigns, are the ones that are saturating a lot of social media. And it's that seems to be informing Donald Trump. And it's that seems to be informing the fringe parties on the left and on the right. And the fringe parties tend to be at the horns of a dilemma, and almost you can see them, whether they are left or right, politically touching each other. So they're almost the same in the way they do things. Why people are doing it, why people are believing it, I think people just fail to drill into the real detail that's behind things. And if you look at our news cycles, our news cycles tend to be very short commentary. You don't get into the long form detail that we manage to do here on Times Radio Frontline. So please encourage your friends and wider audience to come and subscribe for Times Radio Frontline and to watch this. This is where you'll get proper long form argument and push this out across your social media channels to try and counter the Russian narrative and the other narratives that are misleading us. Adrian, isn't it time to accept that the US is not any longer a dependable ally and that the EU and partners have to plan ahead, come what may? From what I understand from military experts, the intelligence from the US is way better than what the Ukrainians in Europe can provide, but it's not like Ukraine would be blind. And from a weapons perspective, we buy them for big profits for the United States. Even if that stops, the US would try and force its wishes on Ukraine. Adrian, you've hit a number of points there. Yes, the US is becoming less and less of a dependable ally, because to have a dependable ally, you need an ally where you know what their intent is and you can plan from a longer term perspective. Donald Trump is changing his mind. Now that hurts us, but it's also causing a bit of consternation in Moscow, because Putin doesn't know whether Donald Trump's going to change his mind again in 2 or 3 months' time. So that in itself is a good thing. The intelligence, yes, US intelligence is very good indeed, because they control certain domains, in particular in space, with certain capabilities and provide that forward. But the gaps are being filled very quickly indeed, and a lot of different nations are growing their intelligence capabilities. They just haven't got the same sort of volume and therefore the same sort of coverage that the Americans have got. And of course, we have to remember that the Americans control a lot of the geospatial data that's needed for navigation and everything else through their military GPS satellite system. There isn't a European equivalent. And therefore, that is one area where the US has got a degree of control. We'll see if Europe starts to launch its own rival to GPS and weapons. This is an interesting one. I don't think Donald Trump will ever stop selling weapons to Europe for Europe to then supply those US weapons to Ukraine, because it's too much money for him, and he looks at things from a business perspective. So I don't think that will ever stop, even if he withdraws all other support. So again, you'll note from my tone a degree of confusion, because I think there is confusion around anything to do with Donald Trump and making decisions, or Donald Trump and sticking to decisions. Next point comes from Stephen. You say, why do you let Trump and the rest of the MAGA cronies come on Times Radio? I haven't seen Trump and MAGA cronies come on Times Radio, but I do know what Times Radio does is it tries to bring a balanced argument. There's no point in trying to focus on one view. You have to have a balance. And when you bring that balance in, we have got some of the best journalists in the world. Those journalists in the world will give a platform to people with different views. And it's important that we understand the different views that are out there and then try and tie them together. I know you, as the Times Radio Frontline audience, tie it together very well indeed. But so whenever you see something that you maybe disagree with, don't turn around and criticize us giving a platform. Recognize that it's important to give that balance, and our audience makes the judgment on the detail for themselves, and we know what side they come down on. But an important point to bring out. Thank you, Stephen. And then final point from Lars again, and you say, isn't the fact that Ukrainian troops are spread thin not due to the lack of personnel, but drones? They have turned trenches into traps, and 10 kilometers behind the conflict line into almost impossible to survive without being undercover. Ukraine has about 800,000 soldiers in the field, the same number as in 23-24. You're partially correct, Lars. The front line is huge. That's the biggest problem. You've got 1,000 kilometers of front line. You can't have real depth of lots of troops over that 1,000 kilometers of front line. Doctrinally, you aren't going to be able to provide the detailed defensive positions from troops in trenches. And yes, you're 100% right. The threat in the trenches that are not properly covered and with stops that stop drones from getting into them means that the drone threat, with the drone threat, hiding in a trench isn't as safe as it once was when it was there just to deal with artillery. The other threat that there is to the trenches is the fact that the Russians are using so many more glide bombs, and therefore if you get a ton of high explosives landing anywhere near a trench, no trench is designed or could survive that going off anywhere near it. So they turn into death traps. And that's why they're manned sparsely. The Ukrainians and the Russians can surveil their trench positions with their own surveillance drones, and that is happening a lot of the time. And the Ukrainians, in particular, are getting more mobile, more maneuverist troops that can then attack in and plug different holes, and then they're using maneuver again to attack back into the cities of Pokrovsk and Lushansk, I believe, to some success. But an interesting point from you, Lars. So for all of you, thanks for watching this week's question and answer and for posting your questions. Remember, if you want exclusive access to our videos early, please sign up for Times Radio membership. And that will allow you then to get your questions posed that I can answer on a weekly basis. And of course, if you want to get us on your favorite podcast channel, just search for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.